Oral questions. Questions Honorable Andrew Scheer.
Years of NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, and time's up. And Canadians are suffering. And the Liberals look around the country and they see tent cities popping up in our community.
Maybe Pierre's late.
Lining up at food banks and families falling further and further into debt. And what do they think is the cause of all these problems? That Canadians aren't paying enough in taxes. That must be why they've already hiked the carbon tax 5 times and why they're going to hike it to 61 cents a litre. How can making everything more expensive provide any relief for Canadians?
Exactly.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives are finally talking about the economy because it gives me a chance to highlight some good economic news we've had. Last week, we learned that inflation in August was at 2%. In fact, for all of this year, inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range. That means interest rates are coming down. Meanwhile, wages have been outpacing inflation for 19 months in a row. But the Conservatives don't like to talk about that because good news for Canadians is bad news.
Yeah, exactly.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
She can tell all the people lining up at food banks that they've never had it so good, and she knows that prices are not coming down. She also knows that her carbon tax won't stop a single forest fire or flood. They've admitted that. So Canadians get the brutal double whammy of all the extra costs associated with natural disasters, plus the carbon tax on top of it. And now the NDP leader is trying to pull off another stunt. He's trying to fool Canadians that he's got some new position on the carbon tax.
Yeah.
In reality, he loves it. He's voted for it 24 times. If they're so sure that Canadians love their carbon tax, why don't they take it to the Canadian people and let them decide in a carbon tax election?
Yeah. And they're voting on a vote of non-confidence tomorrow.
Sir Finance.
Mr. Speaker, all these Conservatives know how to do is talk Canada down. And you know why that is? It's because they don't want Canadians to ask themselves what the Conservatives really stand for. That's because the Conservatives have a hidden agenda. They have a hidden austerity agenda. And it is time for us all to ask ourselves, what would they cut? Would they cut childcare? I think so. Would they cut dental care? I think so. Would they cut our housing plan? There she would.
No, they wouldn't. They're going to increase building of housing.
Hell.
It's Canadians who are cutting back as they've seen their paychecks devalued and prices skyrocket. But it's not just the carbon tax that the NDP and Liberals are hiking. The new tax hike that the government is announcing today will hit the middle class hard. In the middle of a housing crisis, they're raising taxes on carpenters and roofers. In fact, the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations said this, quote, "The capital gains increase will discourage the construction of new rental homes for Canadians." Why is the government's response to the housing crisis punishing the people who actually build the homes?
Right.
Yeah. Drop some W's for Andrew Scheer, man.
Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker.
I am really glad to hear the Conservatives talk about housing because last week we made a very important announcement on housing. Last week we announced that amortizations for first-time home buyers and everyone buying new builds will be extended.
Yeah. That ain't that good, man.
Help young Canadians make the dream of home ownership a reality, and it will get more homes built faster. And I am shocked that the Conservatives are opposed to this.
Perpetual debt. Forever debt. You will owe nothing and be happy.
$100 for a doctor's appointment. For-profit corporations like Loblaws are forcing patients to pay to see a doctor. Now, the Conservatives love this because their chief strategist, Jenny Byrne, also doubles as a chief lobbyist for Loblaws. The Liberals promised a crackdown. That turned out to be a letdown. Why does a Liberal government continue to let big corporations rip off Canadians and stop defending and not defend our healthcare system?
What are you going to do, Jag? You going to go and threaten to beat people up?
Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NDP had a choice. Continue working on pharmacare, continue working on dental, continue working to improve our health system, or to cave to a bully. And here's the facts, Mr. Speaker. If the NDP can't stand up to the Conservative leader, then how are they going to stand up for Canadians? The reality is we're going to keep fighting to improve our healthcare system and work on the basis of collaboration. We're not going to cave to the bullying of the Conservatives across the way, and we're going to make sure that every Canadian gets dental care, pharmacare, and yes, to make sure that we revolutionize primary care.
Oh my goodness.
Then I had
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Again and again to big corporations that are ripping off Canadians, and they've not stood up to the Conservatives. Au Quebec.
In Quebec, the CSN says
Call the election. Vote for the non-confidence, bud.
Sickness. We know the Conservatives want to see CEOs enrich themselves upon the backs of the sick. But it's very disappointing to see this from the Liberals. They promised to stop the privatisation of healthcare. They have failed. Is it because they're too weak to stand up to the Conservatives, or too beholden to CEOs?
Everyone's attacking each other.
The Honourable Minister for Health.
I fucking love it.
Speaker, week is 2 days after the Conservative leader demands you stop action to work with the government to help Canadians on health care, to run away. You know what else this week? To abandon climate action when the Conservative leader puts too much pressure on you. And I think Canadians, if the NDP is willing to stand up for them, if they can't stand up to the Conservative leader, I will say to you that we are here each and every day to make sure that Canadians get what they need, to stand up for our public health care system, and to make sure the Conservatives don't get what they want, which is to cut to the bone our health system.
His hand was shaking, but that was pretty good. Going after Jagmeet like that. I like it.
Dundas, South Glengarry.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up.
That was really good.
And time is up. Here's how bad the carbon tax has driven up inflation in food costs in Toronto. The Daily Bread Food Bank says their monthly usage has gone from 60,000 to 350,000 people per month. That's a 480% increase. Pre-COVID, they spent $1.5 million per year on food. Today, $29 million. Their only solution is to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Instead, why don't we have a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide?
Yeah, W's in the chat for carbon tax election, huh?
Families, children, and social development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity once again today to talk about what's up, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you what's up. Women's participation in the workforce is way up and has reached
this
high.
person back here is always wearing that, eh?
Are being built, and that means 250,000 new spaces by 2026, Mr. Speaker. We know the Conservatives would like to cut these programs, but on this side of the House, we will fight for Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
The Liberals will make you think you've never had it so good, despite millions of Canadians having to line up at a food bank every month. And we just don't know how many more facts they need to see about how damaging the carbon tax really is. The trucking industry says it adds $4 billion a year. Farmers are going to pay $1 billion more in carbon taxes, and food banks in every part of this country are seeing skyrocketing use. And their own budget documents say it blows a hole of about $35 billion at least in the economy. Again, if they're so confident, call an election and let Canadians decide on the carbon tax itself.
There you go, man. Call that election, huh? Vote tomorrow for the non-confidence.
For the environment and climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Interest rates are down.
Orange jumpsuit guy
is down. Gas prices are down. And pollution is down, Mr. Speaker. Pollution levels are at their lowest level in 25 years, Mr. Speaker. What we've achieved is the equivalent of removing from our roads 69 million cars less pollutions for Canadians, for our kids, all across the country. We're fighting for climate change. We're fighting for Canadians. We're fighting for a better future for all Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
Isn't he stopping construction of roads or something?
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, everyone knows taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and pretty soon
time is up.
These corrupt Liberals.
Yeah.
I'll remember a couple of weeks ago where a brave steelworker confronted the Prime Minister and said taxes are killing him, and he doesn't believe a single word the Prime Minister has to say. And yet, the NDP keeps propping up this unpopular government. Why? Because their leader wants to keep his pension. Why is this NDP Liberal government so intent on raising the carbon tax and reducing workers' pay?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, for all the Canadians,
Oh, the Chihuahua.
they will know what's up, Mr. Speaker. It's investment in the future of this country, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
Under this Liberal government, investment is up in decarbonization to make sure that our steel mill would be productive, to make sure that our steel workers would have a job, to make sure that Canada would win. In
They don't want us to invest in
Mr.
ourselves.
Speaker, Canadians know that what's up.
They want to make the decision on how to invest in us.
That we make sure that we invest in them and we build the Canada of the 21st century.
How about you let Canadians invest in ourselves?
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
That minister has some nerve to talk about steel. Let me tell you this. I met with steel workers in the steel industry, and they have said if they quadruple the carbon tax like they plan, there will not be a single steel plant left in this country. That's his economic record. That's what he's doing to Canadians. And the carbon tax is not an environmental plan. It's a tax plan that's blowing a $35 billion hole into the Canadian economy.
Holy shit.
Workers are bringing home less. They're paying more. It's time for a change. Why don't they call a carbon tax election and let Canadians decide?
Ooh, no more steel in Canada? We'll outsource everything to China because they do it so much better, so much cleaner.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to talk not only about steel but about aluminum, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Because one thing that Canadian workers know is that it's time to stand up for them. We stood up for them, Mr. Speaker.
That's
we
right.
just imposed tariff
Oh, that's Freeland.
on steel that is coming from China to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we would protect our industry.
That's
we
right.
would protect our job. We would protect our future. Mr. Speaker, workers across the nation know that we have their back. We will fight for the industry, and we will always fight for Canada, Mr. Speaker.
These people would rather outsource to China, where it's way less ethical, way more polluting. Are you freaking kidding me?
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have weakened the criminal code, and now crime is moving out of Montreal and is becoming tentacular everywhere in Quebec. Let's not forget that Bloc voted for the Liberal government's bill allowing criminals to be arrested and released twice in the same day sometimes. The Liberal government and its Bloc...
But you go to jail for life for hate speech online, which isn't even defined yet. Ugh.
The Honourable Minister for Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Mr. Speaker, with regards to release on bail, what we did is that we changed the rules with the support of all parties in this House. We also increased penalties for certain crimes like car theft, but with regards to the provisions, this is a decision made by justices in our country who are appointed by provincial governments. Appeals decisions are made by provincial Crown prosecutors. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister recognise that changes through C5, C75, C83, does he recognise that criminals are no longer scared of anything?
Yeah, man, it's
Crime is
insane.
exploding throughout Quebec. A 14-year-old died in Beauce. Shots have been fired in Quebec City and in the Saguenay.
More and more, you're seeing gun violence by illegal gun owners,
their mistakes, and
criminals.
the criminal code to what it was.
Tougher on crime, on actual crime.
General of Canada. Just to be absolutely clear, when a decision is made, it is made by a provincially appointed justice. An appeals decision is also made by an attorney appointed by a province. When a decision is made to see if there's enough place in prison to welcome someone, that is a decision made by provincial governments like the government of Quebec. In 3 words, speak to Legault. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for
I know it's in French, and I know a lot of people are turned off from the French stuff, but
immigration levels. He said that they took a little too long.
I'd recommend you stick around for this still.
Speaker,
there's some pretty good info and zingers in this.
For years, the Bloc Québécois has been warning the minister for years. We presented him with facts, and he responded with insults. Does he realise today that we would not be caught up in such a fiasco had he listened to Quebec's warnings instead of calling everyone all kinds of names? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees.
He's not going to have his job for much longer.
Heard a compliment in my regard from my colleague, perhaps thinly veiled, but from here on in, I expect the Bloc to support our measures that will allow us to reduce immigration by temporary immigration by 7.5%. I hope that we will have his personal collaboration, because last time he contacted my office was to increase the number of temporary workers. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. I think that he's mixing a few conversations that were private. To quote the Minister again, it's always easy to look back and say, well, we should have done this or that. Mr. Speaker, what would have been easy is to listen when it was time to do so. I had somewhat of an issue hearing the question from the member for Lac-Saint-Jean, so I would ask him to start it again from the top. To quote the minister again, it's always easy to look back and say we should have done this or that. Mr. Speaker, what would have been easy is to listen when it was time. Quebec warned him. The Bloc Québécois warned him. The economists of major banks warned him. Even his own officials warned his government as early as 2022 that his immigration targets would put pressure on healthcare and housing. He listened to no one and insulted everyone. Now it's too late to listen, but it's perhaps not too late to act. What is he waiting for, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Mr. Speaker.
Dude, this guy's under criminal investigation by the FBI for his failed immigration policies.
Remind the member across the way that it's the same Quebec government that tripled.
He's not going to have his job for much longer.
The number of temporary residences under their jurisdiction. We have the duty of readjusting. That is what we are doing, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, he just blamed his own government last week. It's all well and good if the minister admits that he took too long to act, but this admitted fault is not yet half forgiven, because at the moment there is no distribution of asylum seekers. A record number of asylum seekers are on social assistance because they're waiting months and months for their work permit from the federal government. They're not even allowed to work, Mr. Speaker. There's still years upon years upon years of delays in processing applications, and all the while, Quebec's public services are overworked. When are we going to see real action on the ground with real results, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees.
It's honestly crazy how fast and of an about turn they took, that he took on immigration.
Minister Jean-François Robert. I will be meeting him tomorrow with the Minister for Public Safety, and I expect
he's under investigation because of the amount of terrorists that he let in to this country.
Kawartha Lakes